Okay, what was... All right, so actually, I need to know what the pick order was. So we know what the final draft was, right? So we have Sion in top lane. We have... What do we have in jungle? We have Wukong in jungle. We have Syndra. We have Syndra, and then we have Zeri, and then we have Lulu. And obviously, it's a really big draft win for SK. Okay, and then down here we have Draven, and then we have Soraka, and then we have... What do we have here? We have Akali, and then we have Sejuani, and then we have Jax, right? Okay. Now let's see the bans. Give me 1 second. I'm going to end up getting you guys the bans. Okay, so we had Annie, Rakan, and Vi. And then over here, we have Gragus, Yace, and Meowkai. And then over... Okay, and then when it ends up speeding up, we got Azir, Kennen. We got Azir, and then we got Kennen. And then what? And then Kassanti. And then Nautilus. Okay. And the pick order is Zeri on top, and then Wukong Lulu, and then here is Draven, Yejuani, EX, and then is it Soraka on R4? Should be Soraka on R4 and then counterpick mid, right? I assume that is correct. Okay, Soraka on R4. Okay, cool. All right, so we got the draft. All right, so let's talk about this really quick. All right, let's see here. Epic Pen. Oh, Epic Pen's open. Okay. Okay. So, all right. So this is, this right here is Excel, and then this is SK. Now, SK is presumed to be the better team. So, okay. Excel open with B1 Zeri. Don't like B1 Zeri. Again, because she's weak to a lot of themes. She is not a versus all champion anymore. She used to be, when she was in one of her like past broken states. She's no longer a versus all champion. Generally, the B1 champion, as always, has to be a gray champion in the sense that its role is not predefined. It has multiple ways of playing, or it has multiple different, just multiple ways of playing. Role not predefined in sense of like where it's going to end up going, ADK, ADC, support, mid, top, etc. And doesn't have such a theme answer. SK end up responding with one bad pick, one okay pick. So they end up going Sejuani. Now, in theory, Sejuani is able to go mid and also able to go jungle, able to go top. Not really. We know that Sejuani is just always going to end up being jungle in a spot like this, and then the Draven. So the Draven is definitely a check mark. The Sejuani is definitely bad, because now what's happening is that they choose two champions that have a particular theme. Now, it's going to be unlikely that Zeri is going to be able to pivot out of the theme, because Zeri just doesn't have the option to really do that, like some other B1 marksman would be able to do. Like if Aphelios was on B1 or something getting countered like this, or like Vayne or something like that. Yeah, if it was like Vayne getting countered or something like this, Vayne could maybe move up to top lane, or you could just draft a protect comp at that point, because you know the theme of the enemy Draven as well as the Sejuani. What ends up happening here is that Excel go completely, concrete block to the head, and they end up picking Wukong, and they pick Lulu. So the Wukong vacuum answering the Sejuani, but Sejuani outscales the Wukong, and then they end up blinding Lulu. Lulu is not a blind option for Zeri. Even if you do try to ban out the Soraka, there's plenty of other supports that can actually go with Draven that just allow Draven to have a winning lane. Draven also does outscale Zeri in a lot of team compositions. Not all of them, but he does outscale them. So let me make this really clear for people, because I know that the last couple of times that I've said this, there's a bunch of people in like the YouTube comments, or there's people that like tweet at me when I say this, and they're like, what do you mean Draven outscales Zeri? So what ends up happening is if Zeri is on even footing with Draven, so if Draven's 0-0-0, or he's like 0-1-0, doesn't have any stacks, etc. like that, and they show up to the first team fight, and Zeri has shield bow, and Draven just has, Dirk plus components to an item, or Draven just has one item as well. Yes, Zeri is probably going to be a lot better in the mass majority of situations than Draven in isolation there. When it gets to 2 items, if Draven's also on even footing with Zeri, Zeri is a lot better than Draven at 2 items. When it starts getting to 3 and 4 items, 3 items is really where Draven, it's going to depend on a little bit more context, might start actually offering more than Zeri just because of his damage output, but again, It's going to have to come down to team compositions. And then once you start getting to 4 items, Draven just begins to overthrow Zeri because his axes pretty much two-shot everyone in the game at that point, barring like he's facing all tanks or all bruisers. At that point, every single item pickup from that point forward, Zeri is never able to walk up to the Draven in most cases, and Draven's damage is way too high. And so at that threshold, Draven ends up outscaling. So the Jax ends up coming in here blind, and you know they're going to end up banning away the Kennen, they're going to ban away the K'Sante. Now the Jax is always a gambit because you have to get to level 16 in order for Jax to be the old variation of Jax. I think that you can get away with this with players that are not particularly good at punishing. You know that like you know that like Odo Omne is not going to be particularly great at like punishing Jax or like playing any of the really good mechanical top laners and being able to do anything to Jax. Jace is already banned away, Kennen and K'Sante taken away. I mean, even the K'Sante is not necessarily like a punish to the Jax, but K'Sante definitely has a lot more edge over Jax pre-16, and depending on most game states. Now, the bans end up being useless. So you ban a totally dogshit champion, Azir. That doesn't make any sense because, okay, sure, you are getting outranged and you are kind of engaging onto the opponents, but there's too many mid laners available. And so your mid lane ban doesn't make sense. And again, the support ban also doesn't make sense because Draven has too many support options available. Now, I really like the Soraka on R4. This is just a hard winning bot lane. Soraka giga stomps all of these champions. The silence for the Wukong is also really good. And so at this point in the draft, I mean, SK are just like, they're like 9-1 dogs almost inside of the draft. Opponents end up going Sion, and Syndra ends up getting picked up. So now Sion can definitely be an unkillable wall for the Jax and the Draven in the later stages of the game, but the problem is that the Jax and the Draven has really good effectiveness against the Wukong and the Zeri. The other problem is that the Soraka is in the team comp, so currently you have no damage coming from any of your champions, and then Soraka's silence as well as her sustained healing inside of the fights. It doesn't matter that Draven and Jax aren't dealing particularly great damage to the Sion up front, because Sion can never actually do anything versus the Soraka. The Syndra ends up coming in blind. I think Syndra is a dog shit champion unless you're literally a super god tier elite mid laner. And even if that is the case, I mean, Syndra just coming in blind, I think is just an awful pick in most cases. You see that the enemy ends up having Soraka. You see the enemy also has some bruisery champions. You see the enemy also has one of the best bloodthirster champions in the game. And you know that, you know, as Syndra, you just don't know what you're going up against yet. And so there's even chances for Syndra to actually get outranged here by like champions like Ziggs, or even like Aurelion Sol would be good in a spot like this. So like Ziggs could come in, you know, Aurelion Sol could end up coming in. I mean, the Akali ends up coming in as like a vacuum response, just an isolation against the Syndra. And so this is what ends up happening. Now, I don't think that you're going to get things like Veigar, but I don't even think that a champion like Veigar would be super bad. Merc Tread incentive would definitely go way up if Veigar did end up coming in, but I don't think that Veigar would be particularly bad because he builds so much HP, and so that with Soraka inside of the team fights, you're just not going to end up dying in a lot of cases. So I don't even think that Veigar would be, you know, particularly terrible in a spot like that. A champion that's not really going to incentivize any sort of magic resistance or like Merc Tread stacking would also be Sylas. He doesn't have the greatest of ultimates, but I don't think that he would actually be the worst in the world. But I do think that like Sylas would end up being an option. I think Orianna is another option that allows them to play really well against the range of the Syndra, but it doesn't really matter how you look at it. It's just that SK are just so far ahead in the draft because Excel, they're the beatdown, but they're also getting outscaled. So they have the responsibility to run into SK, but they also currently have 2 losing lanes, and they also have a losing scaling jungle dynamic matchup. So what do you do when you're the beatdown? You have to run into the opponents, you're shorter range, and you get outscaled, and you have losing lanes. It's just a complete disaster all around. Fuck, dude, I had to speak so fast because I feel like I'm going to miss the draft of the next game. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, that's it.